Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church. Happy Easter to all of you, especially to the kids. I miss not seeing you in person. Frankly, I'm not even seeing Monica or David or Lee or Don or Rich. We're staying away from each other, not because we don't like each other, in fact we do, but we need to stay safe and away from people outside our home. So for the first time, we are actually recording at home. Let's see how this works. I think we may need a bit of an Easter miracle, but we'll find out. I'm sorry, kids, that we're not having our traditional Easter egg hunt on church grounds. But I bet most of you have had some fun chocolate surprises this morning. I need to tell you, I have always loved the chocolate Easter egg because it's a solid piece of chocolate. I was always disappointed as a kid with these really tall chocolate bunnies, and you take the foil off and you take a bite. Ooh, and it's all hollow on the inside. But that old chocolate Easter egg, it's only about, this high. But you know, it's solid chocolate through and through. I can just about taste it right now. I hope you kids are doing all right. I bet keeping away from friends feels pretty tough. Not much fun, and my goodness, it's been about a month already. These are hard times. But we need to understand these are hard times not only for you, these are hard times not only for the people in Salt Lake City, nor in the state of Utah or our country. The virus that we're trying to stay away from is spread all over the world. You know, in every country you're not allowed to visit anybody. That's how we try to stay safe, all over the world. But I like what the Prime Minister of New Zealand has ordered. She's a young mom, so maybe that's why she said, nobody is allowed to leave their homes and go visiting friends, with two exceptions. One, the Tooth Fairy, and the second one, the Easter Bunny. She has elevated them to the status of essential personnel. I think she was right to do so. I wish she was head of our country. Wouldn't that be something? Oh my. You know, when a bad or scary thing happens, like the coronavirus, we need to remember it's not the end of the story. The stories we know usually have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But the Easter story is different. There's always a new chapter to be written that is filled with promise and hope. For example, we know that this pandemic will not be for always. This pandemic is not the end of the story. Like many troublesome things in life, it too will pass, and we will get to play with our friends again. And no, that's an important message of Easter. You know, just when you think that everything will end terribly, Easter will surprise you with a miracle. And the miracle is that we always get another chance, we could always begin again, and there's always a new chapter to be written. And that's why we celebrate Easter. There's a real hope that sadness can turn to joy. Sadness does not last forever. What else can you say but hallelujah and happy Easter? And now to David, who I believe is in church all alone. He's going to light the chalice and then help us through a fun song.
Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather together to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Good morning. Obviously, I'm not shooting this video from the sanctuary at our church. We decided to go out for a walk this morning like we do many mornings because we're getting, probably like most of you, a little stir-crazy being cooped up. But one of the things that we have enjoyed so much when we go out for walks in our neighborhood are the trees that are blossoming and seeing spring really come round. Our neighborhood is full of flowering trees, and it made me think of something, especially as it relates to the religious education department, because this week their theme is hope. About 300 years ago, there was an English poet named Alexander Pope, and he wrote a poem that the opening words were "Hope springs eternal." Well, I've been thinking about that, and certainly this week we can flip those words around and we can say spring hopes eternal. And in a way, that's what I think every time I go out and look at our trees is, wow, here is spring hoping that time will start all over again. And it does that no matter what else is going on in the world. Well, about 60 years ago, there was a woman by the name of Georgia Bello, and she lived out in Magna, right here in the Utah Valley, Salt Lake Valley. And I'm not really sure what the circumstances were, but I think she was probably having a hard time, because as an accomplished pianist and as a vocalist, she didn't have a piano. But one spring, her little son, who was named Kenneth, looked out the window and he said, "Mom, look, popcorn is popping on the apricot tree." Well, that gave her an idea, and out of that the song was born, "Popcorn Popping on the Apricot Tree." I learned that song as a little kid with my Mormon friends because Georgia Bello was a Mormon and she published this song through her church. But it has now covered all sorts of denominations. And for the junior choir, you folks will know that this is one of Miss Nikki's favorite songs. And we've sung it quite a few different years. So the one further interesting part of that story, going back to Miss Bello, is at the time, as an accomplished pianist and singer, she didn't have a piano. But Kenneth's sister had a little toy piano that was only one octave. Well, Mrs. Bello decided that she would go ahead and write down "Popcorn Popping on the Apricot Tree" on the toy piano. And that is where it began. So for our opening song this morning, that's what we're going to sing. And guess what? I've got the toy piano right here. So I'm going to sing it through once with the words and the toy piano, and then I think the words will come up on the screen and we'll all sing it together. Okay? I hope this works. I looked out the window and what did I see? Popcorn popping on the apricot tree. Spring has brought me such a nice surprise. Popcorn popping right before my eyes. I could take an armful and make a treat. A popcorn ball that would smell so sweet. It wasn't really so, but it seems to be. Popcorn popping on the apricot tree.
Well, David, that was a fun song to be sure. Blossoms are just popping before our eyes. Pop, pop, pop. What an excellent way to describe the spring. Easter, well, Easter is fun. And the way we celebrate all this popping of new life is to remind ourselves what a blessing it is for life to return again and again. You know, after winter, when we see no signs of life, suddenly, when we least expect it, we see the color of green starting to spread everywhere. And green is the color of life. Every Easter, for the past 44 years, I have always read the same poem in church. I like it because the poet, E. Cummings, who incidentally is a Unitarian, but that's not why I like the poem, I like the way he writes his poetry, in this case about the spring. Cummings writes about the green spirit. Isn't that a lovely idea? The green spirit of trees, and how blue the sky looks in the spring. He likes being out in nature because nature always says the same thing, and that is yes. And he feels, just so alive again in springtime, out in nature where he appreciates life and love and the wings of birds returning to where he lives. My goodness, he hasn't seen birds all winter long. But winter is over, and a new chapter has begun. And it's such a miracle for him that he says, "Now the ears of my ears awake." In other words, he's saying, now I can really listen, I can really hear what's happening. And he ends it with, "And the eyes of my eyes are open." He sees the world differently now, as it should be seen. And so the poem goes like this. I thank you, God, for this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees, and for a blue dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings and of the gay, great happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any lifted from the know of all nothing, human being, doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are open. Amen.
This morning's reading is by author Anne Lamott. I've been traveling around the country for nearly 2 weeks on book tour, and without exception, my audiences have been filled with lovely, bright people who feel doomed. In New York City, they were too sad to be ironic, just devastated. And in the deep South, where they pet me and give me home-baked cookies and pocket crosses, their eyes tear up. People do not feel anxious or frustrated or doomed-ish in a mopey Eeyore kind of way. They feel cursed, cut down, scared to death, like during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's as if we were all waiting for biopsy results for someone we love. We try to be brave. No one has a clue how we are going to come through this fever dream. They come to my events because I am usually a cranky optimist who believes that if it seems like a bad ending, it's probably not the ending. They hope that I have found some spiritual, political, or psychological tools to cope and transcend. Yeah, right. I think they are a tiny, tiny bit tired of hearing me say that grace bats last. And then in the meantime, we practice radical self-care, pick up litter, flirt with old people. They're probably sick of hearing my secular father's golden rule, don't be an asshat. And above all, listen, 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 hear each other. I think they are tired of me repeating that the only things that ever help are left, right, left, right. Breathe. I think they are tired of me saying around Easter that the crucifixion looked like a big win for the Romans. The following Monday, Caesar and Herod were still in power, the chief priests were still the chief priests, and meanwhile, in a tucked away corner, the 12 were transformed, and some women too. It's amazing to stop pretending that things are not as bizarre and dire and hard as they are in the marriage, for your grown child, in the nation. To be where your feet are and to feel it all, the swirl of doom, of gratitude, of incredulous fear, of wonder, of hate, judgment, love. Dr. O nailed it when he said, writing fiction is like driving at night with the headlights on. You can only see a little ways in front of you, but you can make the whole trip that way. That is true about every single aspect of life. Maybe people are sick of me quoting that too, but it's true. It doesn't make sense to stay fixated on what we don't know. We only know now. We have all been through long stretches of feeling truly doomed. Deaths, divorces, breakdown, failure. They call it the abyss because it's pretty abysmal, but we know the precious community that kept us company. We know sacrifice, mercy, the arc toward justice. We know that the love and solidarity were real and profoundly, eternally true. And it is now where your feet are, abundantly. And hey, hallelujah, y'all. Well, once again, welcome, friends. I'm so glad that you're joining us from wherever you are, whether you're here in Salt Lake City or around the country, maybe somewhere out in the world, watching from your laptop or your smartphone. We're just delighted that you're here, and thank you again for joining us for our virtual worship. As you can see, we're recording from home, practicing even better social distancing until we can all be together again, taking good care of ourselves and each other. I do have just a couple of announcements. Nothing really new that you haven't heard, but some good reminders for us every week. If you haven't had a chance yet to turn in your pledge card, we're still going on with our pledge campaign for next year. We encourage you to send in your payments to finish up your pledges for this year, 1920. And send in that pledge card for the 2021 year as well. You can do this if you still got the card that we sent you in the mail. That's the easiest way. Just drop it in the mail. You can also go to our website, click on the donate button up on the right hand corner, and it'll take you to a page where you can create an account and fill out your pledge that way. If any of this sounds like too much hassle, call the church office, leave us a message. Stephanie or Margaret will get right back to you and walk you through it step by step. While we're talking about money, we still do encourage you, if you are blessed to have some extra money, maybe from a trip that got canceled or when your stimulus money comes down, we encourage you to donate some of that to our Family Assistance Fund. We know that we will have members and friends here who are struggling financially as we go through this really tender time together. And so we encourage you to make your love real, help one another by donating to the Family Assistance Fund. You can do it via your smartphone. We have the Givelify app that we encourage people to use in this time. No need to send a check or find a stamp. You can give right from your smartphone. Just download the Givelify app from your iTunes store or your Google store, whatever kind of device you have. Find Givelify and download it, and then locate our church on the map, and it'll take you through step by step. You can choose on that last page which fund you'd like to give to. If you don't see the Family Assistance Fund, then you can just write it on the memo on the last page. And finally, I want to encourage you, if you haven't joined us yet for our Thursday afternoon Zoom call, you can join me from 11:30 to 1 o'clock on Zoom. You can find the link in your Torch email. It's just a hangout, just to see how everybody's doing, just to see some familiar faces and talk to one another, let me know your concerns, and we would love to have you. So thank you. Now I invite you to a familiar bit of our worship as David plays the doxology for us. If you want to stand up from your sofa or your table, go right ahead. Happy Easter. Like many of you, I've been busy in the kitchen these past few weeks. You can see my bread that I just made this morning. I've baked lots of bread and cookies because for me, there's nothing like stress baking for when you don't know what to do, but you need to feel productive. I've even gotten brave, and I'm trying to make a little kitchen magic happen with my first sourdough starter. Well, technically it's my second because the first one didn't come out so good. So I've always used dry yeast in the red packet from the grocery store, but now that it's impossible to find, I'm reaching back to the knowledge of my beer selling days and remembering that yeast is everywhere. As geneticist Sudeep Agarwala put it on Tumblr, friends, I learned over Zoom drinks last night that y'all are baking so much that there's a shortage of yeast. I, your local frumpy yeast geneticist, have come here to tell you this. There is never a shortage of yeast. Yeast is one of the most common organisms around in most places occupied by humans. It loves people, and it loves the things that we eat and drink. And so, you can collect yeast from fruit, from old beer cans or wine bottles, from stale bread, lots of things, and put that yeast to work, making your own baked goodies. It's the closest I've come to witnessing spontaneous generation, Agarwala says. It always feels like there's a bit of magic around whenever it works. Well, I'll have to see if it works for me in a few days. My neighborhood next door app is full of people asking for sourdough starters. It's amusing, but it's also deeply encouraging to me. Just like dogs who circle around on their beds before lying down to go to sleep without really knowing why they're doing it, so we sweet human animals seem to go to the kitchen when we find ourselves full of anxiety and dread. We may not understand why we're doing it, but it's been bred into us over thousands of generations. Something inside us just knows that when our species is threatened, we can do worse than to focus on the basics: food, shelter, rest. So much else, we find, is truly unnecessary. And we find ourselves wondering why we invested so much of ourselves in those extraneous things in the first place. The Indian novelist Arundhati Roy has had this to say as she's watched the coronavirus outbreak unfold in her own country. Whatever it is, the coronavirus has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could. Our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to normality, trying to stitch our future to our past and refusing to acknowledge the rupture. But the rupture exists, and in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Roy says this pandemic is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world, and ready to fight for it. On this Holy Weekend, I can't help but think of Jesus rolling the stone away and walking lightly through that portal into the new world. It looks so easy when he does it. And in the Gospels, he goes to great pains to show the disciples that he's still the same Jesus as before, not a ghost. He walks and talks with them and eats with them. And Thomas the doubter touches his wounds and believes. Even Jesus seems to want to believe and to reassure his friends that nothing has changed. I'm mindful, too, that before their world changed, Jesus gathered his closest friends together for a simple meal. Just bread and wine, nothing fancy, the staff of life, the cup of fellowship. And they ate together. And Jesus reminded them that though none of them knew what was going to happen, they could get through it if they went through it together. And after his death, Jesus met his disciples once more, this time for breakfast. Fish just caught by their own hands, grilled right there on the beach. life given up for new life. The disciples decided to let themselves be surprised by what shape life would take after they lost everything they knew, to be surprised when they saw God appear where they'd never seen God appear before. I think what's really getting to most of us right now is the uncertainty of it all. Whether you're stuck at home, whether you're on the front lines, whether you're simply waiting, or if the circumstances of life are more stressful than ever before. Most of us know by now that nothing will be the same on the other side of this pandemic. But we don't have enough information to guess what's waiting for us on the other side of that stone. But we can take heart that life is always being preserved, then and now. Resurrection comes out of whatever's lying around. We don't have to have the best stuff or the stuff we're used to working with. There's always a bit of magic lying around, and we can use it to reconstruct our lives. May each of you be blessed until our Easter morning finally dawns and we see life anew. Amen.
Although I like saying Happy Easter and wishing everybody a Happy Easter, and I really enjoy doing that. It feels good. But to tell you the truth, Easter has never been my favorite holiday. The symbols used by religious progressives to make sense of the Easter miracle have grown stale over the years, if not actually trite. Yes, we know nature has bounced back to life, but the crocus and the daffodil have become tired symbols. The crocus can work as a metaphor, but it can also be easily exploited as it was by T.S. Eliot's mother. You know, she taught Sunday school in a Unitarian church in St. Louis and fancied herself to be a poet. And every Easter, she would scratch out some poems for the religious education classes, poems filled with references to the hallowed crocus. Her famous poet son, T.S. Eliot, could neither abide his mother's shallow theology nor her vapid poetry. In fact, she may have been the contributing force that drove him clear to London, where he converted to the Anglican Church and was baptized by none other than the Archbishop of Canterbury. I think T.S. Eliot may have overreacted. Don't you think so? I myself would rather resign myself to bad poetry than to leave Unitarianism to become a member of the Church of England. This Easter, however, Easter 2020, wow, it has quite a different feel to it, doesn't it? These are no ordinary times as we go through the novel experiences of social isolation and come to terms with the language of confinement, shelter in place, quarantine, lockdown. Experts in epidemiology, a field of medicine that surely has never been mentioned in any Easter service ever in the history of doing Easter services, but now epidemiologists seem to be just on the tip of our tongues, and we've got to include them in an Easter service because they offer measures for protecting us, for helping us, for offering new social behaviors to keep us safe so that we can have life. It's really an old Easter theme. Death must not have the last word. You know, it used to be faith alone, but now it's faith and masks and gloves that help us transcend death. Or in the story of Passover, Jews had to deal with a pandemic or a plague at that time, and we're talking about 3,000 years ago. And what they did was they smeared the blood of the lamb on their doorposts so that the plague would pass over their homes and not infect them. And this was done long before there were concepts like flattening the curve or equipment like ventilators. The test in those days was not a swab, but devotion to God. Our feeling so powerless today may well resemble what Jews felt during their time in captivity in Egypt, needing to escape bondage, desperate to breathe the new air of freedom. And this need to breathe some freedom is probably felt most acutely by young parents today with young children just not knowing how long they're going to be kept in bondage. So what kept the people in our historical sacred texts going? The same thing that keeps us going. Hope. The hope for new life in the midst of struggle and dark times. This hope motivated the stories of Passover and Easter. They were chronicles of life's irrepressible powers. And likewise, the holy days of Ramadan arrive at this time of year as well. And why place the holy days of renewal in the spring? Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because the earth mirrors this fundamental truth as demonstrated by the barren and lifeless winter, giving way to new life emerging once again. Think of it. No sweeter message can touch our hearts. New life beginning again. The three monotheistic religions springing to life in Mesopotamia, the people of the book, all tied to Abraham, may have had very little use for the daffodil, but yet, they celebrate concurrently with the frozen earth, thawing sufficiently for little sprigs of yellow and purple and green to pop up and just stop us in our tracks. Life, here it comes again. Wow, it always does, just as surely as the dawn follows the night. But you know, I feel it more profoundly this year. Like most of us who mindlessly keep on life's treadmill moving faster and faster and faster, we've suddenly ground to a halt. It's like, imagine a power outage at the gym, which has just stopped everybody's treadmill, cold, and what happens? We stumble, we may even trip, we kind of look around, looking for clues. Hey, what happened? What's going on? And then we learn that we can't get back on that treadmill for a very long time. Wow. So suddenly, we must begin to learn how to function in new ways. Suddenly, we have some time to notice things. Wow. Notice things that have, preempted our busy lives. As we routinely go about our lives, stuck in habits, going through all that stuff to help us through the day, we actually fail to notice what blessings we really do have. And thus, in bursts of warmer weather, kind of just metaphorically rather than just being on the treadmill, I now wander out and I take some deep breaths. And Mary says to me, pointing in our front yard, do you see those irises growing? And she's surprised to hear me say, yes, I noticed. I really did notice. And hopefully, most of us who now have a little more time to notice, a little more time to walk in the midst of nature's awakening, to breathe a new sense of freedom away from being chained to routines, I hope that now we're able to grow in understanding of what Albert Schweitzer called reverence for life, and what Rachel Carson referred to as a sense of wonder. Is it miracle? Is it hope? Is it faith? Is it freedom? Is it courage? It's all of these, lifting us higher and higher towards a real deep personal renewal. My Easter thoughts this year are grounded in a global Good Friday, a time of suffering and worry and fear. But as I told the children earlier this morning, Good Friday is not the end of the story. And therein lies the hope. A new story awaits us with an opportunity, with hope, that we will have been changed sufficiently by the Good Friday experience. We have a chance now, just imagine this, we have the chance now to rethink everything during our time of isolation, with a faith that new life will emerge. Now, what will this new life look and feel like? What we're learning during this time of worry and fear is to remember what in life is essential. What really matters. We've lost sight of that. And isn't it remarkable that the message of Easter, Passover, and Ramadan is one of spiritual redemption? We have wandered far from the touchstones of our religious heritage and the wisdom that it had breathed throughout the ages. In Passover, Jews are reminded once again that every individual in every generation is obliged to view themselves as though they had actually gone forth from Egypt. In order to leave Egypt, each individual must break out of a personal narrowness, becoming free to achieve their full spiritual potential. In Ramadan, Muslims are reminded to perform charitable deeds. They must strive for a heightened awareness of God, the premise being that with reverence and a sense of wonder, one's spirituality is heightened to greater awareness of life's suffering and our need to respond. Easter reminds Christians that life is stronger than death, and Christians who observe the teachings of Jesus are reminded that revolutionary ideas of responding to the poor with compassion continue to be forsaken. Easter, too, calls for spiritual redemption, like breaking free of our narrow self-preoccupation, like transforming our hearts with charitable deeds. All three springtime holy days ask us to examine, who are we becoming? That's quite a question, isn't it? Do we ever stop long enough to really ask ourselves that? Stop long enough to say, hey, honestly, who are we becoming? Isn't it time to rethink everything? Our lifestyles, our relationships, our values, our priorities. This is the time now for us to make necessary changes. This is the time now to construct a whole new way of being. And the message strikes me as more penetrating and clear and precise than ever before. The widespread loss of health, food, shelter have become transparently obvious throughout the world. And when the virus finally passes over, it will be impossible for us to return to our old ways. Don't you think? I mean, you really think we're just going to resume all those bad patterns and habits we've been doing? I don't know. I don't think we can return to our old ways. I think there is hope now for a more compassionate way of the world, a deeper compassion that will lead to greater peace and justice and understanding among all people. The promise that love will blossom in this harsh and barren and indifferent world feels palpable. Just as the crocus and daffodil and iris burst before us in miraculous ways, we too have the capacity for new life. Don't you feel it this Easter? I do, and it fills me with great hope. Amen.
Thank you, friends, for joining us today. It's been a delight to record this worship for you. Our closing words are by Nancy Wood. Hold on to what is good, even if it is a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it is a tree which stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it is a long way from here. Hold on to my hand, even when I have gone away from you. Take care, friends. We'll see you next week. Please join us for our virtual coffee hour. You can find the link on our website or in your Torch email, which came out on Friday. Bye. Thanks.